For decades, Robert Sylvester Kelly was not just a celebrity. He was a soundtrack to adolescence, romance, heartbreak, and celebration. His music dominated radio waves, wedding playlists, and award stages. He was hailed as a generational talent, a hitmaker whose voice carried vulnerability and confidence in equal measure. To fans, R. Kelly was a cultural pillar. To the industry, he was profitable, bankable, untouchable. Behind that public image, however, was a parallel life defined by manipulation, control, and systematic abuse, one that unfolded slowly, quietly, and in full view of people who either didn't want to see it or chose not to intervene. His double life was not hidden in isolation. It existed alongside fame, protected by wealth, celebrity worship, and an entertainment system that rewarded silence. Kelly's rise began in Chicago, where he grew up in a working-class environment marked by instability and trauma. Music became both his escape and his currency. By the early 1990s, his career was accelerating rapidly. Hits piled up, collaborations multiplied. With success came access, unrestricted, unquestioned access to young fans, aspiring singers, and vulnerable teenagers who saw proximity to him as a dream opportunity. From the earliest stages of his fame, rumors followed him. Whispers about inappropriate behavior with underage girls circulated in industry circles long before they reached the public. In 1994, Kelly secretly married Olia, who was only 15 at the time. The marriage was annulled, and the incident was quietly buried. No meaningful consequences followed. The message was clear: talent outweighed accountability. As his career flourished, so did the pattern. Kelly allegedly targeted girls who admired him, often approaching them at concerts, malls, or schools. Promises of mentorship, stardom, or protection were used as entry points. Parents were reassured, guardians were once isolated. These girls were drawn into an environment governed entirely by Kelly's rules, enforced through psychological manipulation, fear, and dependency. Former victims later described a chillingly consistent structure. Phones were taken, contact with family was restricted, clothing, eating, sleeping, and movement were controlled. Disobedience was punished, compliance was rewarded. Kelly allegedly framed himself as both savior and authority, positioning resistance as betrayal. Over time, autonomy eroded, identity dissolved. Despite mounting allegations, the public persona remained intact. Kelly continued releasing music. Awards were given. Applause was thunderous. When accusations surfaced, they were often reframed as attacks on a successful black artist, dismissed as lies from opportunists, or minimized as private matters. Media outlets debated the claims without interrogating the power imbalance at their core. In 2002, child pornography charges were filed after a videotape surfaced allegedly showing Kelly engaging in sexual acts with a minor. The trial that followed became a spectacle. The evidence was explicit. The accusations were severe. Yet in 2008, Kelly was acquitted on all counts. The verdict reinforced his perceived invincibility. To supporters, it was vindication. To victims, it was devastating confirmation that justice was optional when fame intervened. After the acquittal, the abuse allegedly continued. New victims came forward years later, describing eerily similar experiences. The consistency of their accounts painted a portrait not of isolated incidents, but of a long-running system. Kelly's wealth allowed legal pressure. His celebrity discouraged scrutiny. His entourage, employees, and associates unknowingly, others willfully ignorant, became part of the machinery that enabled him. It was not until investigative journalism and survivor advocacy converged that the narrative began to fracture. In 2017 and 2019, detailed reporting exposed the scope of Kelly's alleged conduct, including claims of sexual exploitation, coercion, and trafficking. Public opinion shifted. Radio stations stopped playing his music. Collaborators distanced themselves. Long-ignored voices were finally amplified. In 2019, Kelly was arrested and charged with multiple federal offenses. This time, the approach was different. Prosecutors focused not just on individual acts, but on patterns of behavior: racketeering, trafficking, and exploitation that spanned decades. Survivors testified in harrowing detail, describing fear, degradation, and long-term psychological damage. Their testimonies were not sensationalized. They were methodical, corroborated, and devastating. In 2021, R. Kelly was convicted in federal court on racketeering and sex trafficking charges. In 2022, he was convicted again on child sexual abuse charges in a separate federal trial. The verdicts represented more than legal accountability. They marked a cultural reckoning. A man once celebrated worldwide was now legally recognized as a serial abuser who had used fame as a shield and weapon. The sentencing reflected the magnitude of the crimes. Decades in prison, the end of public life, the dismantling of the myth. Yet, even with conviction, the damage remains irreversible. Survivors continue to navigate trauma shaped not only by abuse, but by years of disbelief and dismissal. Many have spoken about the compounded pain of watching their abusers celebrated while they were silenced. Psychologists analyzing the case point to the unique danger posed by celebrity predators. Fame creates asymmetry. It distorts credibility. It trains audiences to doubt victims rather than question idols. When combined with institutional inertia, record labels, managers, promoters, and media outlets unwilling to disrupt profit streams, the result is prolonged harm on a massive scale. R. Kelly's double life was not sustained by secrecy alone. It was sustained by applause, by contracts, by standing ovations that drowned out warnings. Each hit song reinforced the illusion. Each award ceremony widened the gap between public image and private reality. The question his case leaves behind is not just how one man committed such crimes, but how so many systems failed so completely. How many adults ignored signs? How many institutions prioritized revenue over responsibility? How many times did silence masquerade as neutrality? Today, Kelly sits in prison, his music legacy permanently fractured. For some, separating art from artist remains a personal debate. For survivors, the debate is irrelevant. Their lives were shaped by actions taken under the protection of fame. And just as though delayed came only after extraordinary resilience. His story stands as a grim reminder that celebrity does not reveal character, it conceals it. And when admiration replaces scrutiny, monsters do not need to hide. They perform in plain sight. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. For decades, Jimmy Savile was woven into the fabric of British culture. He was everywhere, on television screens, radio airwaves, charity posters, hospital wards, and royal events. With his cigar, tracksuits, and eccentric charm, he cultivated an image that felt harmless, even lovable. He branded himself as Uncle Jimmy, a tireless fundraiser, a friend to children, a man who gave his life to good causes. Millions trusted him. Institutions celebrated him. The media protected him. Behind that image existed one of the most extensive and horrifying patterns of sexual abuse in modern history. Savile's double life was not merely hidden, it was actively enabled by the very systems that praised him. His crimes unfolded over more than half a century, spanning television studios, hospitals, schools, care homes, and charitable institutions, often in plain sight. Savile's rise began in post-war Britain, where he worked as a DJ and promoter before transitioning into television. By the 1960s and 70s, he had become a household name through shows like Top of the Pops and Jim'll Fix It. The latter cemented his image as a benevolent figure who made children's dreams come true. Letters poured in from young viewers, eager to meet him. Savile controlled access. He chose who came close. What the public did not know was that this access was precisely the point. Survivors later described a pattern of behavior that was chillingly consistent. Savile targeted children and vulnerable individuals, many with disabilities, many from disadvantaged backgrounds who were unlikely to be believed if they spoke out. He exploited environments where authority was absolute and oversight was minimal. Hospitals became one of his most disturbing hunting grounds. Savile volunteered extensively, gaining unrestricted access to wards, including those housing terminally ill patients, psychiatric patients, and children. He was granted keys, offices, and autonomy. Staff deferred to him because of his celebrity status and charitable contributions. Survivors later reported abuse occurring in hospital rooms, corridors, storage areas, and even mortuaries. Whispers followed him everywhere. Rumors circulated in the BBC. Nurses warned colleagues. Journalists heard stories. Police received complaints. But Savile's power was not simply personal, it was institutional. He was friends with executives, politicians, and royalty. He was knighted. He raised millions for charity. Questioning him felt taboo, even dangerous. Victims who attempted to speak were dismissed, mocked, or ignored. Some were children who lacked the language to describe what had happened. Others were adults whose credibility was undermined due to disability or institutionalization. Many were told they misunderstood his behavior. Some were warned to stay quiet. The message was unmistakable. Jimmy Savile was untouchable. Savile himself was brazen. He joked publicly about sexual behavior, made inappropriate comments on television, and surrounded himself with young people. In hindsight, the signs were everywhere, but at the time, they were framed as eccentricity. The public persona acted as camouflage. His fame distorted perception, turning predatory behavior into quirkiness. The abuse continued unchecked until Savile's death in 2011. It was only after he could no longer defend himself that the truth began to surface in full. Investigations revealed hundreds of victims, possibly over 1,000, abused across decades. The age range was staggering. Some victims were as young as 5. The locations were countless. The institutional failures were undeniable. Posthumous investigations concluded that Savile was a prolific sexual predator whose crimes were an open secret in some circles. Reports documented repeated missed opportunities to stop him. The BBC acknowledged failures in leadership and culture. Hospitals admitted granting him unrestricted access without safeguards. Law enforcement admitted complaints were mishandled or abandoned. For survivors, the revelations were both validating and devastating. Many spoke of lifelong trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, broken relationships, and distrust of authority. Some described the unique pain of being abused by someone universally admired. The disbelief they faced for years compounded the harm. When society finally listened, it was too late for justice in a legal sense. Psychologists examining the Savile case emphasized the role of celebrity in silencing victims. Fame does not merely elevate a person, it reshapes reality around them. When someone is perceived as universally good, accusations are reframed as anomalies. Victims become the problem. Institutions rationalize inaction to avoid scandal. Over time, silence becomes policy. Savile's double life thrived because it was profitable, convenient, and protected. His charity work insulated him. His connections shielded him. His image discouraged scrutiny. The result was a predator operating for decades with near-total impunity, leaving devastation in his wake. The reckoning that followed forced Britain to confront uncomfortable truths not just about one man, but about how power operates when wrapped in public affection. Savile did not hide in shadows. He stood on stages, smiled for cameras, and posed with children while abusing others behind closed doors. His legacy is now inseparable from the harm he caused. Statues were removed. Honors were stripped. His name became synonymous with betrayal. But the deeper legacy is institutional, a reminder that when reputation outweighs accountability, evil does not need secrecy. It needs permission. Jimmy Savile was loved by millions. That love became his greatest weapon. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. For generations, Bill Cosby represented safety. He was not just famous, he was trusted. He was the smiling face in living rooms across America, the embodiment of warmth, wisdom, and moral authority. As America's dad, he lectured audiences about responsibility, family values, and respect. Parents let their children watch him without hesitation. Networks built entire brands around his image. His voice carried weight far beyond entertainment. Behind that carefully constructed persona was a long-running pattern of sexual violence that spanned decades, hidden not by secrecy alone, but by admiration, denial, and the power of reputation. Cosby's double life was sustained by the same qualities that made him beloved: credibility, influence, and cultural reverence. Cosby's career took off in the 1960s when he broke racial barriers in television and comedy. He became a symbol of progress, a respected figure who transcended race in mainstream America. By the time The Cosby Show aired in the 1980s, his status was untouchable. He wasn't just an entertainer, he was a moral authority. Universities awarded him honorary degrees. Politicians praised him. He lectured black communities about personal responsibility, reinforcing the image of a man who lived by the values he preached. What few knew was that allegations of sexual assault had been quietly following him for years. Women later described eerily similar encounters. Cosby would invite them to his home, a hotel room, or a professional meeting under the guise of mentorship or opportunity. Drinks were offered, pills were given, described as vitamins or medication. Consciousness faded, consent disappeared. Many women woke up confused, disoriented, and violated, unsure of what had happened, but certain something was wrong. Some were young, aspiring actresses, others were models, students, or professionals. Some were teenagers, all shared the same problem. The man they accused was one of the most powerful figures in American culture. For decades, these stories went nowhere. When women spoke privately, they were dismissed. When some tried to come forward publicly, they were ignored, ridiculed, or threatened with legal retaliation. Cosby's legal team aggressively silenced accusers. Confidential settlements were reached. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. The machinery of wealth and influence worked exactly as designed. The public continued to see a different man. Cosby lectured about morality. He condemned crime and irresponsibility. He positioned himself as a protector of women and children. This contrast wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Psychologists later noted that predators with public moral authority often weaponize that image, knowing it makes accusations seem implausible. The turning point came not through law enforcement, but through persistence. In the mid-2000s, civil cases began to surface. In 2005, Andrea Constand accused Cosby of drugging and sexually assaulting her. Though criminal charges were initially dropped, depositions revealed something damning. Cosby admitted under oath that he had obtained quaaludes to give to women before sexual encounters. The admission existed for years, buried in legal records, ignored by mainstream media. It wasn't until 2014 when comedian Hannibal Buress publicly called Cosby a rapist during a stand-up routine that the dam finally broke. The clip went viral. Women who had been silent for decades felt heard for the first time. One by one, accusations surfaced. The number grew into the dozens. The pattern became undeniable. In 2018, Cosby was convicted of aggravated, indecent assault. The verdict shattered an illusion that had stood for half a century. For the first time, America was forced to reconcile the image of its most trusted father figure with the reality of a serial predator. He was sentenced to prison, a moment many survivors believed would never come. Though Cosby's conviction was later overturned on procedural grounds in 2021, the reversal did not erase the testimony. It did not invalidate the stories. It did not restore his reputation. The court ruling addressed a legal technicality, not innocence. The cultural verdict had already been delivered. For survivors, the damage was lifelong. Many spoke of lost careers, broken trust, and decades of silence enforced by fear and disbelief. Some described watching Cosby praised on television while they carried trauma alone. Others spoke about the unique cruelty of being assaulted by someone the world insisted was good. The Cosby case exposed a dangerous truth. Respectability can be a shield. When society elevates someone to moral authority, it becomes psychologically difficult to imagine them capable of harm. Accusers are framed as liars. Patterns are dismissed as coincidence. Institutions protect the image rather than the vulnerable. Cosby's double life did not survive because no one knew. It survived because no one wanted to believe. His legacy now stands as a warning about fame, power, and the cost of mistaking reputation for character. He was loved by millions. He told America how to live, and for decades, that love protected a monster hiding in plain sight. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. For decades, Harvey Weinstein was one of the most feared and revered men in Hollywood. He didn't just produce movies, he decided careers. His approval could launch an actor into stardom or quietly end their future before it began. Awards followed him. Red carpets welcomed him. Celebrities praised him publicly while fearing him privately. To the outside world, he was a genius producer, a tastemaker, a man responsible for some of the most celebrated films of a generation. Behind that reputation was a system of abuse built on intimidation, silence, and absolute power. Weinstein's double life did not rely on secrecy alone. It relied on an industry willing to look away, rationalize behavior, and sacrifice individuals to protect success. Weinstein's rise began in the independent film world, where he co-founded Miramax. His aggressive style was legendary. He bullied executives, screamed at staff, and dominated negotiations. But the results were undeniable: Oscar wins, critical acclaim, and massive profits. His cruelty was reframed as brilliance. His volatility became part of the myth. Young actresses entering Hollywood were often told the same thing: if Harvey Weinstein wanted to meet you, you went. Meetings were set in hotel rooms, not offices. Assistants were present just long enough to normalize the situation, then disappeared. What followed, according to dozens of women, was a familiar pattern: demands disguised as opportunities, coercion framed as consent, and threats masked as career advice. Some women were assaulted, others were pressured into sexual acts out of fear. Many froze, unsure how to respond, when the most powerful man in the room made it clear that refusal had consequences. Weinstein didn't need physical force. His leverage was professional annihilation. Those who resisted often saw auditions disappear, roles vanished, phone calls stopped being returned. Others were warned quietly that they were difficult. Careers stalled. The message spread without being spoken. Rumors circulated for years. Jokes were made at award shows. Journalists heard whispers. Agents warned clients behind closed doors, yet nothing happened. Weinstein settled complaints quietly, paying millions in confidential agreements that kept victims silent and preserved his public image. Legal teams handled the damage. Studios continued to work with him. Stars posed for photos at his side. The silence was not accidental, it was structural. Hollywood depended on Weinstein's money, his distribution power, his awards campaigns. Speaking out meant risking not just one career, but many. The industry chose self-preservation. Everything changed in 2017, when investigative reporting finally broke through the wall of fear. Detailed accounts from women spanning decades revealed a consistent pattern of abuse. The sheer volume of testimony made denial impossible. The double life collapsed almost overnight. Weinstein was fired from his own company. Powerful allies vanished. The same industry that once protected him rushed to distance itself. Statements of shock flooded social media, even from those who had known for years. In court, the myth of the untouchable producer unraveled. Survivors testified about trauma, fear, and lost futures. Weinstein was convicted of rape and sexual assault, sentenced to prison, and later convicted again in a separate trial. The man who once controlled Hollywood from behind closed doors was reduced to a defendant in a wheelchair, stripped of power and illusion. For survivors, justice was incomplete, but real. Many spoke about the cost of waiting decades to be believed. Others described the surreal experience of watching an entire industry pretend ignorance after years of complicity. Weinstein's case exposed how power protects itself. He did not operate alone. He was enabled by assistants who scheduled meetings, executives who ignored complaints, lawyers who silenced victims, and colleagues who benefited from his success. His crimes were not hidden in darkness, they were normalized by convenience. Harvey Weinstein was celebrated as a visionary. He built masterpieces, shaped culture, and stood at the center of fame. All the while, he used that position to exploit, degrade, and destroy lives. Loved by the industry, feared by those who knew him. A monster who didn't hide in secrecy, he hid in power. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped, or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. For decades, Kevin Spacey was synonymous with prestige in Hollywood. He won Oscars, dominated Broadway, and became the face of critically acclaimed television with House of Cards. His presence commanded attention, respect, and admiration. Industry insiders lauded his talent. The public adored his performances. To fans, he was a brilliant actor, a mentor to young talent, and a symbol of artistic sophistication. But behind the charm, accolades, and polished public image, Spacey allegedly led a double life of sexual abuse and harassment, exploiting the very system that celebrated him. His fame became a shield, and his reputation as a mentor and gentleman masked predatory behavior that spanned decades. Accounts from multiple victims paint a consistent and disturbing picture. Young men, often aspiring actors or industry hopefuls, described being targeted in professional settings, private meetings, and even during industry events. Spacey's status created a terrifying imbalance of power. He could make or break careers with a single recommendation or withdrawal of support. Victims later recounted feeling trapped, unsure if they were being flirted with, complimented, or violated. The allegations involved both subtle manipulation and direct assault. Some victims described being intoxicated at parties or private gatherings before unwanted sexual advances. Others spoke of inappropriate touching, coercion, or propositions framed as mentorship opportunities. Many reported psychological abuse, threats to career prospects, gaslighting, or insistence on secrecy under the guise of trust. Spacey's behavior was often overlooked or dismissed for years. Partly, this was due to his fame. Agents, producers, and colleagues were reluctant to challenge one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Partly, it was due to societal discomfort with confronting male victims, especially in a workplace where ambition is often conflated with tolerance of inappropriate behavior. This combination allowed predatory actions to continue with minimal scrutiny. The turning point came in 2017 when actor Anthony Rapp publicly accused Spacey of sexual misconduct that occurred when Rapp was only 14. The revelation unleashed a wave of additional allegations from other men. The public narrative shifted almost overnight. Spacey's carefully curated image of respectability crumbled as stories from decades past came to light, revealing a pattern of exploitation, manipulation, and abuse. The consequences were swift. Netflix severed ties, removing him from House of Cards. Stage productions cut him from performances. Industry awards rescinded honors. Legal investigations were launched, including criminal charges in both the United States and the United Kingdom. While some charges were later dismissed or resulted in acquittals, the cultural reckoning was undeniable. The public could no longer separate the man from his actions. For survivors, the damage endured long before Spacey faced accountability. Many experienced trauma compounded by disbelief, professional repercussions, and the tension of confronting a figure adored by the world. The betrayal of trust was magnified by his position: a mentor, a respected artist, a celebrated public figure, someone who should have safeguarded aspiring talent, not exploited it. Kevin Spacey's case underscores a chilling reality about celebrity, power, and access. When an individual possesses fame, influence, and industry control, it becomes possible to exploit ambition, silence victims, and evade accountability for decades. Fame does not just conceal misconduct, it actively protects it, as the fear of challenging a cultural icon suppresses inquiry, complaint, and intervention. Spacey's legacy, once thought to be that of artistic genius, is now inseparable from the harm he inflicted. To millions, the performances remain, but they are forever haunted by the knowledge of the predator who existed behind the curtain, smiling at the audience while hiding monstrous behavior from those he was meant to guide. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Woody Allen has been celebrated for decades as a master filmmaker auteur whose films defined generations, blending wit, neurosis, and intricate storytelling into a cinematic signature that earned critical acclaim, awards, and devoted fans. Audiences laughed at his humor, admired his intellect, and revered him as a visionary who could dissect human relationships with unparalleled insight. To the public, Allen was brilliant, eccentric, and harmless. To the industry, he was untouchable, a living legend whose influence spanned theater, film, and literary circles. Behind this public persona lay a private life marked by allegations of abuse and exploitation, primarily centered around his adopted daughter, Dylan Farrow. The case has remained one of the most controversial and emotionally charged in modern celebrity culture, illustrating how fame and power can shield alleged misconduct for decades. The allegations first became public in 1992, when Dylan Farrow, then 7 years old, accused Allen of sexual abuse. The circumstances were complex. Allen was in a high-profile marriage to actress Mia Farrow, and their family life was notoriously tumultuous, involving custody disputes, highly publicized separations, and allegations of emotional manipulation. Nevertheless, Dylan's claims were serious and specific. She alleged that Allen had molested her in the attic of the Farrow family home, an allegation that would later prompt an investigation by the New York State authorities. The investigation, conducted amid enormous media attention, concluded without criminal charges. Prosecutors cited insufficient evidence and concerns about the reliability of testimony, given the child's age and the highly charged family dynamics. Nonetheless, the case sparked a firestorm of debate. Many believed Allen had abused his power and position to harm a vulnerable child, while others argued that the intense family conflict and custody battle complicated the situation, making accusations difficult to adjudicate fairly. Despite these allegations, Allen's career continued. He produced films at a relentless pace, often receiving backing from major studios and financiers. Awards, festivals, and critical acclaim followed him across decades. He worked with some of the industry's most respected actors, many of whom lauded his creative genius, while rarely addressing the allegations in public. The film industry's willingness to separate the artist from the alleged abuser allowed him to maintain both influence and reputation, even as victims' voices were marginalized. For Dylan Farrow, the impact of growing up under Allen's influence and the shadow of alleged abuse was profound. She has spoken publicly about the long-term trauma, including emotional distress, difficulty trusting adults, and the ongoing challenge of reconciling a complex family narrative. Her advocacy in later years has centered on raising awareness about the experiences of children who accuse powerful adults of abuse, emphasizing the courage required to speak out against figures who are celebrated and revered. The Allen case highlights how celebrity can act as both a shield and a weapon. Fame creates leverage, deters scrutiny, and fosters an environment where allegations can be dismissed as opportunistic, unfounded, or politically motivated. Allen's intellectual authority and cultural contributions created a form of protective narrative. Critics and supporters framed him as an eccentric genius, incapable of the behaviors alleged, or as a victim of a vindictive family feud. This narrative overshadowed victims' accounts and complicated efforts for accountability. In the decades since the allegations, the cultural reckoning has evolved. Documentaries, investigative journalism, and public debate have increasingly centered on the balance between artistic contribution and personal conduct. Dylan Farrow continues to speak publicly, emphasizing the importance of listening to survivors, regardless of the power or talent of the accused. Meanwhile, Allen's films continue to be screened and praised, creating a persistent tension between admiration for creative work and acknowledgement of alleged harm. Woody Allen's story is a cautionary tale about how celebrity, intellect, and influence can mask, enable, and perpetuate abuse. It demonstrates that public adoration does not guarantee moral behavior, and that systems both familial and professional can fail to protect the most vulnerable when the accused is celebrated. In Allen's case, the double life was maintained not through secrecy alone, but through reputation, narrative control, and societal willingness to separate the art from the alleged artist. Loved by millions, respected by an industry, a man whose genius masked allegations of profound betrayal, his legacy serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the monsters hiding in plain sight are not only invisible to the public, they are protected by the very admiration they inspire. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. Chris Brown rose to international fame in the mid-2000s as a teenage sensation whose music, dancing, and charisma captivated audiences around the world. With chart-topping hits and sold-out concerts, he was positioned as a role model for young fans, a symbol of talent and perseverance. His appeal was magnetic, drawing millions to admire him, follow his every move, and emulate his style. Yet behind the public image of charm and musical genius was a pattern of violence and abusive behavior, largely concealed by fame, fan loyalty, and an industry eager to protect a profitable artist. Brown's double life was sustained by his celebrity and the reluctance of the public and industry to confront uncomfortable truths. In 2009, the world witnessed a shocking moment that revealed the first glimpses of this private darkness. Brown was arrested for physically assaulting then-girlfriend Rihanna, an incident that resulted in visible injuries and criminal charges. The attack shocked fans, ignited media outrage, and seemed to signal a reckoning. Yet even in the aftermath, Brown retained an enormous fan base, continued to release music, and received continued support from segments of the music industry. The assault, while publicly condemned, did not immediately dismantle the aura of celebrity that protected him. This event was not isolated, but rather the beginning of a long pattern. Multiple women later came forward to allege abuse, ranging from physical violence to emotional manipulation. Brown's celebrity created an environment in which allegations were often met with skepticism or minimized by the media and fans. The fear of losing revenue, marketability, and public image further insulated him from accountability. Beyond physical abuse, witnesses described patterns of control, intimidation, and coercion. Brown allegedly leveraged his fame to influence social circles, legal outcomes, and media narratives, discouraging victims from speaking publicly. The imbalance of power created a climate in which victims often felt helpless, trapped between fear of retaliation and the desire for justice. Legal consequences followed sporadically, including probation, court-mandated anger management programs, and restraining orders. Yet these measures often failed to reflect the scope of the harm or to prevent recurrence. Brown's career continued to flourish, illustrating a disturbing reality. Public affection and professional success can shield abusers from sustained accountability. Over time, the narrative around Brown evolved. Investigative reporting, survivor testimonies, and public scrutiny highlighted the systemic issues of celebrity protection. Critics emphasized how music industry structures managers, labels, agents prioritize profit over protection, enabling abusers to operate with minimal consequences while cultivating devoted fan bases. Psychologists studying the case point to the dual dangers of celebrity abuse, the personal trauma inflicted upon victims, and the societal signals that fame can insulate wrongdoing. In Brown's case, millions of fans continued to support him despite awareness of allegations, creating an environment in which predatory behavior was both enabled and normalized. Chris Brown's story is a chilling example of how fame can act as both shield and weapon. Loved for his artistry, celebrated for his talent, and admired for his persona, he simultaneously inflicted harm on those closest to him. The contradiction between public perception and private behavior underscores a broader societal challenge, distinguishing adoration for talent from accountability for actions. The pop star remains a figure of cultural significance, his music and performances still celebrated, yet the shadow of abuse lingers over his legacy, serving as a stark reminder that monsters can exist behind smiles, that privilege and celebrity can mask cruelty, and that fame does not absolve the harm caused to those left vulnerable in its wake. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary. For decades, Marilyn Manson cultivated an image that fascinated and terrified the public in equal measure. Known for his theatrical performances, confrontational interviews, and extreme aesthetic, he became one of the most notorious figures in rock music. To fans, Manson was a revolutionary artist, challenging societal norms and pushing the boundaries of music, fashion, and culture. To the mainstream, he was a figure of curiosity and fear, often blamed for cultural decay or youth rebellion. Beneath the makeup, stage persona, and carefully crafted chaos lay allegations of abuse and exploitation that spanned years. Manson's fame, shock value, and devoted following allowed him to hide alleged predatory behavior behind the mask of performance, making it difficult for victims to be heard or believed. Multiple women, including former romantic partners, have accused Manson of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. According to testimonies, he exercised intense control over his victims, often using manipulation, intimidation, and isolation to maintain dominance. Many reported being drawn into relationships under the guise of mentorship or artistic collaboration, only to find themselves trapped in cycles of coercion and fear. Victims describe a pattern. Manson would initially present himself as vulnerable, sensitive, or enlightened, someone who understood their struggles and could guide them. Once trust was established, the abuse would escalate. He allegedly used threats, humiliation, and psychological manipulation to ensure compliance, while simultaneously reinforcing his public persona as a misunderstood artist or cultural icon. For years, the allegations remained largely private. Manson's image as a provocative performer shielded him. Fans often conflated his on-stage persona with his personal life, dismissing claims as publicity-seeking or exaggeration. The entertainment industry, largely focused on the profit and spectacle generated by his brand, rarely intervened. His notoriety provided both camouflage and credibility, allowing abuse to persist unchecked. The pattern continued into the 2010s, with multiple survivors speaking out in interviews, legal filings, and social media posts. They described fear of retaliation, threats to their careers, and the psychological toll of confronting someone so publicly celebrated. Some victims reported long-term trauma, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD, stemming from years of manipulation and assault. In 2021 and 2022, several lawsuits and investigations brought renewed attention to Manson's alleged behavior. Media coverage, survivor accounts, and legal proceedings collectively painted a portrait of a man whose public art and private actions were inextricably linked by manipulation and control. While Manson has denied the allegations, the consistency of testimony from multiple independent sources has amplified public scrutiny and pressure for accountability. Psychologists analyzing the case note that celebrity amplifies both risk and concealment. High-profile performers can exploit fan devotion, artistic mystique, and cultural fear to protect abusive behavior. Manson's fame made it difficult for victims to be believed and provided a powerful tool for gaslighting, as the public was conditioned to see him as an icon of rebellion rather than a predator. Marilyn Manson's story exemplifies the dangers of fame intertwined with personal abuse. His artistry continues to influence music and culture, but it exists alongside a dark legacy of alleged harm. The dichotomy between public admiration and private cruelty underscores a critical lesson. Notoriety, talent, or persona cannot excuse abuse, and adoration by millions can become a shield for the worst actions. Loved, feared, celebrated, and reviled, Marilyn Manson's legacy is forever complicated by the shadows cast behind the stage, reminding the world that monsters often hide where the lights are brightest. What part of this case shocked you the most? Would you have escaped or fallen into the trap? Let me know in the comments. For more deep dives into real-life crimes hidden behind power and faith, subscribe and stay tuned for our next investigative documentary.